Hello, I'm John Eckert at Baylor University, and I want to spend just a few minutes today highlighting the way we put together good rubrics with a few different types that will hopefully be helpful to you as you apply some of the knowledge that we talk about all the time at Baylor at the Center for Christian Education. So, if we think about rubrics as a form of criteria for success, we are trying to get students to hit this bullseye here. So, criteria for success gives students what is needed to be successful. So if we think about rubrics as a form of that, we want rubrics to be clear to both the student and the teacher. We want them to be positive, and what I mean by that is we want to tell students what we want to see, not what's missing. And then when it comes to effort and creativity, we want that to be built into each of the criteria in the rubric, but we do not want to have those as explicit categories. Many times that becomes an equity issue when we start judging the amount of time and the kind of materials that have been put in that may be indicative of how much help the student had from home or their ability to get supplies at a place like Hobby Lobby or Michael's. So I would avoid categories around effort and creativity as much as possible. Certainly effort and creativity will directly impact the quality of the student work, but that should be judged as part of the criteria. Now, there are three types of rubrics that I see working well in schools, and they all have their pros and cons. The first is the single point rubric. Single point rubrics are the easiest to write, but they do require some feedback on the back end that requires more time on the part of the teacher. So in the single point rubric, in the center column, the teacher lists out criteria for success. So criteria 1, 2, 3, 4. They say this is what meets my expectations. Now, if the student exceeds expectations, on the back end, the teacher writes what exceeded if the student goes above and beyond these criteria. So if they met criteria 4 and they exceeded here, the teacher would give feedback here. If they did not meet, they would be writing feedback in whatever category that the student did not meet. Again, easy to write, requires more feedback on the back end. The second type, also fairly easy to write, is the holistic rubric. The holistic rubric functions similarly, but instead of thinking about it as component parts, the holistic rubric says, here's what a 4 is as an entire project, a 3, a 2, a 1, and then a 0. The 0 is there if the student doesn't submit work. I'm a big believer that a rubric should not give credit for anything if the student hasn't done something. That works well on a 4-point scale. It becomes problematic on a 100-point scale. But on a 4-point scale, this works really well. Here, the teacher or professor lays out what makes a 4, what makes a 3, what makes a 2, what makes a 1. Really fairly easy to write and easy to use on the back end, but the problem is it doesn't give the student as much direction on what he or she needs to do to improve. The last type, and the one you're probably most familiar with, is the analytic rubric. The analytic rubric is set up by listing the criteria down the side. So criteria 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you have performance levels going across. So let's say your performance levels are 3, 2, 1, and again, we have a 0 here. The teacher or professor lists what's expected to have a performance level of 3 for criteria 1, 2, 3, and 4. Great thing about this is on the back end, it requires very little work for the teacher. On the front end, it takes more time to think through these performance levels. In my opinion, that's the toughest part of rubric writing. Identifying the criteria and then differentiating performance levels across 3 or 4 levels. For more information about rubrics, assessment, feedback, please feel free to reach out to me at my email address, john_eckert@baylor.edu, Or you can also reach me at Twitter at EckertJohn. The reason why we share this is we know we're better educators when we give clear criteria for success to students. So we look forward to working with you in the coming years as we do this work better together.